My name is Tanja Williams, and I'm the Senior Vice President of Student Affairs here at St. Petersburg College. And on behalf of our President, Bill Law, and our Board of Trustees, we want to welcome you here. I want to sort of give a shout out to the Provost of the Seminole campus. That's Mr. Mark Strickland, if you would stand. He operates this campus. Tonight, it's my pleasure to welcome you to this discussion. It is a very important issue. But before we begin, please stand and join me in reciting the Pledge of Allegiance. Our flag is over here. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. It is great to see so many friends, new and old, here tonight. My buddy Jim Oliver and several others, Pastor Williams. And as always, we're happy to welcome you to a number of our St. Petersburg College students. Are there any students in here tonight? Would you stand and, all right. Thank you so much for taking your time out tonight to join us. We also want to acknowledge our media co-sponsors, the Tampa Bay Times, WEDU Television, and WUSF Public Media. Let's give them a round of applause, please. Well, here we are at the beginning of a new year, continuing the Institute's 4th season of providing stimulating conversation with friends over a good meal. That's the concept for this series, and I hope it works well tonight, as it has in the past, as we take up an issue that is extremely important and extremely sensitive. In fact, it may be the most important and the most sensitive of the dozens that the Institute has addressed in the last 4 years. Consider some of them. We had gun control, legalizing marijuana, reforming immigration, or legalizing same-sex marriages. They are all controversial, very big issues, and the country has had to face them or is facing them. But race truth, that is far more significant in American society. I commend the Institute staff for having the courage to address this issue in the civil, respectful setting for which this series of programs is known. St. Petersburg College is committed to diversity and racial equality. One of the college's value statements say, "We foster a learning community which the values and goals and learning styles of all students and members of the college community are recognized and supported." But in too many areas of the community and society, such values are not respected. The daily news headlines reflect that reality. Though they would deny it, Black lives do not appear to matter to some Americans. We are here tonight to bring understanding to the issue of race, to speak the truth that too often is marginalized or outright ignored. Thank each of you for being a part of this event, and I want to thank our speaker and panelists in advance for being a part of it as well. Now, to get the program started, I invite to the stage Mr. David Clement, Executive Director of the Institute for Strategic Policy Solutions.
Thank you, Dr. Williams. Before we move on, let's put the instant survey question up once more briefly. If you got in late or were getting your food, if you didn't get a chance to vote, remember you can only vote once. Using the text application of your smartphone, first text in SPC Seminole, all one word, then type in 22333, and then vote. You can see A, if you agree with the question, B, if you disagree, and C, if you were undecided. And we'll have a discussion about the results later on in the program. And if you're having trouble, ask the student at your table, if there is one, to help you. Some people, like me, might have a little trouble. As Dr. Williams said, tonight's topic is the most weighty we have taken up in more than 4 years. The issue of race is part of the very core of America's character. It preceded the Revolutionary War. It figured in the Declaration of Independence and was a catalyst for the Civil War. And this year just passed, 2015, was a turning point in race relations in America in the wake of Ferguson the previous summer. I'm sorry. It took on new energy in 2015 with the continued shooting of young black men by police officers. It was getting so common that you lost track of the cities and investigations and protests almost. Baltimore, Cleveland, New York, Chicago, Cincinnati, Los Angeles, Miami, Charlotte, Atlanta, Washington, and on and on. And then in June came Charleston. 9 black citizens were gunned down after a Bible study in a historic church in Charleston, South Carolina, by a young white man filled with hate. Then, in my opinion, the conversation changed. White consciousness of racism was greatly elevated. In some places, Confederate flags and Confederate monuments came down, or at least were moved to less conspicuous places. And the country began finally to have a more honest, more real conversation about race than it has had since the Civil Rights Movement in the 60s. Finally, I believe mainstream whites are receptive to the message that African American leaders have long sought to convey, that race is a constant factor in the lives of black Americans, that it generates disrespect, fear, inequality, and in far too many instances, death to young black men and boys, and even boys. We're here tonight to move that conversation forward in this community. To begin the conversation, we will first hear some basic truths about race, facts that probably most people are in the audience, or many people, are not aware of or never gave much thought to in any event. Then we'll go to our distinguished panel to discuss these issues raised and other issues about race in more detail. And we will have participation by the audience with our survey question and with your questions to the panel. Our main speaker, Neil Phillips, I first heard him deliver this Race to Truth presentation in June at the Leadership Florida Conference, which was held here in St. Petersburg. I had thought that I was fairly socially aware, having been an adult during the civil rights movement of the 60s, and witnessing and following Dr. King's crusade to make this country aware of civil rights. But I was really blown away by Neil Phillips' truths that morning. They are frank, thought-provoking, and insightful. Mr. Phillips is currently principal and founder of the Visible Men Academy across the bay in Bradenton. It serves only boys and from disadvantaged homes and community. As you can read in your program, I won't go through his entire biography. He has been an educational administrator for 11 years. He is an Aspen Institute Fellow, as well as a Senior Fellow at the Nantucket Project. And he is a graduate of Harvard and a former, as you will see why, professional basketball player when he stands up. Ladies and gentlemen, please give a warm welcome to Mr. Neil Phillips.
Thank you, David. Thanks to all of you. It is a real honor to be here, and I'm learning as I approach 50 years old and still try to get out on the basketball court, that height is not enough. I don't jog at night anymore. It was something I used to do fairly often. I'm a busy man, as I'm sure everyone in this room is. I prioritize health and fitness. Couldn't find the time, so I would find myself late at night strapping on my running shoes and just going for a jog around my neighborhood. Well, on one such evening, this past spring, I was doing just that. I was jogging around my neighborhood. It wasn't going to be a long jog. I don't have those in me anymore, but it was going to be a jog. And so I was out running around and basically in my own world and looking just a step or two in front of me to try to make my way. And something caused me to pick my eyes up and put my perspective a little further in front. And when I did that, I saw a man who was at the end of his driveway. He was putting his garbage out, rolling out the garbage bins and to the end of the driveway, a ritual that many or most of us are engaged in. And he looked in my direction. I was a few yards, probably 20, 30 yards away from him at this point. He looked in my direction and headed back up his driveway, having left his garbage there. But he started to run. And it's night. It's late. It's close to 11 o'clock at night. And when I saw this reaction, of course, my reaction was to look behind me to figure out what I needed to be running from. When I saw nothing, I had another thought. I'm an optimist. Thought maybe I was inspiring him. I'm out working on my fitness. He sees me. Good opportunity for him to work on his fitness. Didn't take me long to realize that that was not the case either. It then dawned on me that he was frightened. And he was frightened by the image of me in his neighborhood, which also happened to be my neighborhood. But he saw an image that he didn't expect to see. And he had a thought of who I might be. He had no idea who I was, but he had a thought of who I might be, and that frightened him. And it caused him to run up his driveway back to his home. And when I'm putting this all together, I am now scared. I'm now frightened. The first thought in my head is, what if he calls the police? He goes in and he calls the police, or even more frightening, contacts neighborhood security. And what do I do then? So I now go from a jog to a run because I'm trying to get home. I'm frightened. And I imagine on my way home, a couple of police cars, seeing some sirens, pulled over to the side. Of course, I don't have my wallet. I imagine trying to explain myself. I imagine the awkwardness, the anxiety, the tension, maybe some skepticism. And I'm scared. But I get home. And it's when I get home that I start to think about the what-ifs. What could have happened? What if, upon realizing what was happening, I had given in to the emotions that I was feeling? The indignance about feeling disrespected, the anger about feeling that it was my neighborhood, but yet I wasn't free in my neighborhood. And what if I'd have taken a couple of steps onto his driveway to share those thoughts with him? Just to say something like, I'm just out for a run. you're disrespecting me just to make a point. What if by then he's reached his garage? And what if I'm unaware that I've taken a couple of more steps onto his driveway? And what if, I don't know it, but he's reached for his gun because he wants to stand his ground? And then I'm the next headline. I'm the next tragic antagonist, the next, how could this happen here? Is that over dramatic? Maybe it is. But maybe it's not. So I share that with you as a way to communicate that being a black man in America is a full-time job. It's an 11 o'clock at night, running around your own neighborhood job. It's a full-time job. And I must also share with you that my black man tank is pretty full, right? I mean, I grew up in a middle-class home, two wonderfully loving and supportive parents who created opportunities for me to go to wonderful schools, which led to wonderful opportunities to travel and to gain great professional opportunities. And most of all, in terms of having a full black man tank, I know a lot, I mean a lot of white people. Tank's full. And even for me, it's a full-time job. Now, I've got to tell you that I am a reluctant and even resistant expert on race. I actually don't believe there can be such a thing. But what I am an expert on is my relationship with race. I'm the foremost expert on that. But race and race relations and how we experience them, these are all such personal things that I don't believe any of us can be an expert for another. I'm a resistant expert on race. We all know, right, and Dr. Williams said it, David said it, race, it's touchy, it's sensitive, it's risky, it's dangerous. You know, I often ask for a show of hands when I present at who would trade places with me right now, right, to stand up here and talk about this. Not easy. And I usually don't get too many people willing to trade places, which ought to tell me something, but I haven't listened to that yet. It's touchy, but I feel an obligation to try to help our country advance in our relationship. And I often wonder, why can't race be like seatbelts or smoking or recycling, right? So I'm certainly old enough to remember the times when I, as a young boy, would climb into my parents' Ford LTD station wagon. And even if I wanted to put on my seatbelt, I wouldn't be able to find it because it had been buckled and stashed in the creases of the seat. Not wearing the seatbelt, which meant I was going to slide along this fake leather vinyl stuff from door to door every time they took a turn. But now, can't think about driving without putting your seatbelt on. Can't remember the last time I was in a car with someone who didn't automatically put their seatbelt on. Just happened. Smoking. I can walk into a bar in New York City and not be inundated with cigarette smoke. How can we believe that? Recycling, right? So I will admit, I am a big believer in environmental conscientiousness, but it's not first and foremost on my mind, on my list of things that we have got to combat. Yet here it is, every Sunday night for me, I am a meticulous plastic sorter. Cans are over here. If my kids try and mess it up, say, no. Cans go in the blue, cardboard go in the red, and taking it out. I have bought in. And I don't remember being a part of any conversation about any of those things. All I remember is it happened. We as a nation decided that this thing was important, it was declared, and it's been adhered to. Those things have nothing to do with race. But what they do show is our societal ability, capability to transform, to just be different, but not race. There's something about race relations. It's messy, it's complex, it's convoluted. We have not been able to just declare and transform. Now, my agenda is very, very simple and straightforward, and it is breakthrough. Breakthrough to a different place of being on race. An entirely different place of being. A place that disrupts this cycle of one tragic story after another, predictable reactions, social media-based CNN panel reactions to the reactions, tragic outcomes, heartbreak, grief, and yet no seeming enlightenment as a result. How has our world changed since Trayvon Martin lost his life? What did we learn from it? How have we gone to a new place of being? And that list, as David says, is long. I could name many cities, many names, Eric Garner, Michael Brown, go on and on and on. We need to break through. We have to get to a different place of being, somehow, some way. And as I mentioned to you, my black man tank is full. But as you heard in the introduction, I run a school of 120 boys, all of whom qualify for free and reduced meals, all of whom from low-income families. Their tank's not full. So I want a breakthrough for us in this room. I really want the breakthrough for the next generation. I want the breakthrough for the kids. I want us to hand them a different place on race. That's where I want the breakthrough. And then there is all this talk about the conversation. The conversation. Constantly talking about the conversation as if dialogue and discourse is the goal. That's not the goal. What's the conversation supposed to be about? Are white people supposed to continually declare that they're not racist? Are black people supposed to continually declare that our lives matter? That's insulting for both. And how long does the conversation have to be? It feels to me that we've been having this conversation. Not just for months or not just for days or years, but we've been having this conversation. Where is the action? Where's the breakthrough to a new place of being? So, 2 years ago, I was invited to present at an event called the Nantucket Project, and the theme of the event was Seek the Truth, Endure the Consequences. Seek the truth, endure the consequences. So I presented this, Race to Truth. And the subtitle of the presentation is Sprinting to the Finish Line. I'm not sure where I'm going with this here. I wanted to get back. There we go. Sprinting to the finish line of the old, feudal, tired, and played an increasingly useless conversation on race in America. How do we get past the conversation? Right? A place where there's no more talk, no more conversation, no more dialogue, and, right, I'm on stage with the mic, I got the fancy introduction, no more of me, no more thought leaders, right? Just a new place of being on race. Critical that we get there. And so I, in my remaining time, which is probably about 10 minutes, am going to race through the race to truth, which is even more dangerous. But I'm going to do it because we're going to have a wonderful conversation afterward. In racing through the race to truth, there are 3 disclaimers I have to give. The first is that I'm going to generalize. I'm going to generalize, and I'm going to need some allowance for that. The second disclaimer is that my comments are really going to be rooted in black people and white people, given the rapidly emerging multi-ethnic, multi-race, multinational makeup, composition, fabric of our society. That is a very admittedly limited perspective. But I really believe that if we can find breakthrough on that it's going to help and benefit all of us. And then the third disclaimer I'll make, this one's my favorite, I'm presenting truths, immutable truths. And as immutable truths, you can't challenge them. They're truths, capital T, all right? So we start with really the most popular excerpt, the most well-known excerpt from one of the 2 most important documents in our nation's history, the Declaration of Independence, 240 years ago. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Beautiful, poetic, articulate, inspiring. The problem is, they weren't true. Our founding fathers couldn't have believed these truths and the self-evidence of them in a society of slavery. So really what this points to is a very, very early historical example of the need for a diversity committee. Our founding fathers needed a diversity committee because if there were some black people around the table, some women at the table, someone would have raised their hand and said, we can't say this. We can't say it. It's not true. But they didn't have a diversity committee. So they pushed on, which leads to the first truth, which is that America's existence is tied to an untruth. And you say, well, it's 240 years ago, right? Times were different. The reality of it is this untruth continues to anchor how we feel, the authenticity we feel, and how we treat one another. It causes black people, I'm going to generalize, it causes black people to say, well, they said this then and they didn't mean us then. Do they mean us now? And it causes this underpinning of mistrust and skepticism around intentions that we have not been able to shake. We have not been able to shake as a nation. And I imagine, and I can only imagine, when white people are together in the absence of black people, and I'm never in that situation. If I'm there, they're not in the absence of black people. But I would bet that the sentiment comes up and is expressed in one way or another. Wow, why can't we just move on? It's a long time ago. Will these people just let it go? In some way or another. This is me just guessing. But the truth of it is, black people can't just move on. The truth of it is, black people don't want to just move on. Of course, we want a world that's free of racism and discrimination, that helps to humanize all of us and helps provide and create and enable the same opportunities that everyone has, we want that. We want that desperately. But just moving on causes us to feel like so much of our history, our heritage, the identity, the relationship that we've developed with this struggle, all that has been overcome by people, black people and white people before us to create these opportunities. Just moving on feels like we're abandoning that. And somehow, some way, the path to a new place of being on race has to enable us to bring that with us. Bring that feeling of pride around overcoming struggle. It has to be a part of this. We aren't ready to just move on, and I don't know that we ever will be. The next truth. Black people have to stop blaming outside forces for our problems. I said it. Not because outside forces don't exist. They do. Racism, discrimination, profiling, stereotyping, they are alive and well. Alive and well. Disparate numbers in terms of opportunity, criminal justice, enforcement, you name it. You can look and you can find these outside forces. They exist. The reason we have to stop blaming them for our troubles is because for every second we blame, that's another second that we're seeing ourselves as victims. And victims feel powerless. So we have to say, yes, these realities exist, but we are not going to allow ourselves to feel victimized by them. There's evidence that they can be overcome. And we have to understand and embrace the power that comes with letting go of feeling like a victim. The next truth is that politics undermine progress on race relations in America. Politics are divisive. A breakthrough to a different place of being on race requires just the opposite, unity. If you're in a conversation that has the words Democrat, Republican, liberal, conservative, you may very well be in an important conversation. But you're not in a conversation that's going to help us break through to a new place of being on race in America. The fifth truth, issues of poverty are often mistaken for issues of race, and certainly vice versa. As we look across outcomes across all races and ethnicities in this country, we increasingly see the commonality of poverty that is often, right, the common thread and not race. And that should tell us something. My wife and I relocated to Florida going on 5 years ago now from the Washington, D.C. area. We have 2 young sons. We provided our sons with what has been the most impactful lesson in diversity that we could have ever provided, and we didn't even know we were doing it. And that is when they came to Florida for the first time in their lives, they saw poor white people. Florida's got some poor white people, right? I mean, our kids saw poor white people. And it totally changed their view because previously they were associating poverty with blackness. Incredible lesson for them. The next truth, the concept of blackness is limiting. The concept of blackness is limiting. The idea that there is a certain way to be black, that there are certain opinions you must hold if you are black, that there are certain perspectives that must be common among all blacks is limiting. And the challenge is that it limits and squelches the vast diversity among black people. The different perspectives, opinions, voices, ideas. And we can't afford those to be squelched. We need them as part of this process of breaking through. The next truth is that personal responsibility and self-sufficiency require education. Require education. So you often hear, well, we got to pick ourselves up by the bootstraps, and those people go out, get a job, go do it, get it done. Right? So there's a spirit, there's an element of that. That's true. Go get it done. But we have to recognize our obligation through our public education to educate all of our children. All of our children. And realize that our public education system has done wonderful work, done really, really well by so many of us in this country, so many of us in this room. But the numbers of kids for whom our current public education system is not working is an unacceptable number. Is an unacceptable number. We just have to come to terms with that. We have to admit that. We have to respond accordingly. The eighth truth. Black people need to be as committed to mobilizing against intra-race transgressions as we are to mobilizing against inter-race transgressions. We are very, very capable of mobilizing, coming together, letting our voice be heard when we feel that someone, some other, has wronged us. And that is a great trait. But we too often sit by when things are happening among us that we should be outraged by. Black men devaluing other black men's lives. Fathers who don't take on the responsibility of being in the home and raising their children, handling their business. Substandard education. Self-serving politicians. We should be outraged by these things, and we should mobilize as actively and vociferously as we do when we feel wronged by an other. The next truth is the truth with which we have to contend most fiercely. And this truth is that even though we may have reached a point where we say, okay, all men are created equally. Right? I get that. Everywhere I look, I see black men, right, positions of power, they're created equally. The truth is, all men are not valued equally. And we must contend with this truth. When you look at that list of cities, Sanford, the Bronx, Cleveland, Ferguson, Baltimore, there are so many issues attending. You talk about law enforcement practices, you talk about police training, you talk about this, that, the other. At the heart of these tragedies, is the absence of valuing a life. It's what I call worthism, the idea that some lives matter more than others. And the hardest thing for me through these tragedies, the hardest thing for me is as I think and I insert the image of a white boy, a white male in those scenarios, I cannot shake the image that it ends differently. It ends with a crazy mug shot at the police station that goes viral online and people are laughing about it. It ends with a conversation with parents. It ends with being inserted in foster care, child protected. It doesn't end in death. All lives are not valued equally. And finally, the final truth. The path to a new place of being on race in America is paved with dignity, inspiration, and love. We have to find a way to allow the power of love to work its magic, enable us to humanize one another, to listen to one another, to care about one another. At the heart of this is love. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Phillips. What a, I told you it would be inspiring. Now, we want to talk in more depth about the points he made. And to get that started, I would like to call to the podium our moderator for this evening. It is Dr. Joyce Hamilton Henry, Regional Director of Development in the Tampa office of the American Civil Liberties Union. Please read her impressive bio in your program and welcome her. Dr. Henry.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for inviting me to be a part of tonight's program. And for the sake of time and to ensure that everyone gets an opportunity to fully participate, I'll move rapidly into introducing our panelists, who I'll call up to the podium. We have with us Ms. Maria Scruggs. She's president of the St. Petersburg chapter of the NAACP. Will you join us, please? Next, we have Reverend Clarence Williams. He's a senior pastor of Greater Mount Zion African Methodist Episcopal Church in St. Pete. Please join us. And last but not least, we have the Honorable Irene Sullivan. She's a retired judge from the 6th Judicial Circuit, Pinellas and Pasco, and author of the book, Raised by the Court. Please join us. Now, you were asked earlier to respond to a survey question. Do we have that information ready at this point? Do we? I want you to see how you voted. So the surveys posted. The question was, racism has created a separation between whites and blacks that is ingrained in the national character. And you, the audience, responded. 88% of you agreed, 8% disagreed, and 4% is undecided. We will have an opportunity to discuss your responses later in the program. Now, I would like to give the panelists an opportunity to respond to the 10 truths as expressed and explained by Mr. Phillips. Starting with you, Ms. Scruggs, would you like to respond to his comments?
I certainly want to concur that many of Mr. Phillips' truths are truth, and many of which I can agree without a whole lot of explanation. I think the truths speak for themselves. The one area that I want to address is a possible solution. How do we get past the conversation? Being a public sector manager in the state of Florida, having worked with various aspects of government, I think the place that we began to chip away at the institute of racism is through the very institutions that we pay for. We began to hold accountable the heads and leaders of the institutions, such as our sheriff, Bob Gualtieri, when we monitor the court decree that declares that the sheriff department should be looking and monitoring their hiring practices for minorities. We hold accountable Charlie Justice, chairman of the Pinellas County Commission, to say who's monitoring the county's human rights office. We hold accountable Mayor Kreisman when we say we have a potential $60 million that is going to be invested into the African American community. Who holds him accountable for ensuring that those dollars are used $60 million. Who holds him accountable to ensuring that it is going to help uplift the lives and businesses of those that it is targeted for? In the very beautiful institution that we are part of with Dr. Law, who holds Dr. Law accountable in ensuring that when African Americans are applying for adjunct positions here with doctorate degrees, that they're at least given an opportunity to interview? And last but not least, who holds Mike Greco accountable when 5 of the elementary schools in the African community within Florida are among the 13 worst schools in the state of Florida? That is how I truly believe that we begin to move the discussion forward, when those of us who vote hold those accountable that we place in office. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Cruggs. Reverend Williams?
I hope it works. But first of all, I enjoyed your presentation, and I didn't get the question number down, but one of the questions alluded to stop blaming outside forces, and I want to touch on that for a moment. And I kind of agree with your conclusion, but I'm a little troubled about how you got there. The question for me isn't whether I can overcome or not, or whether I should build the self-fortitude to be able to overcome. The question is, why should I have to? If the playing field is leveled, then there is no need to acquire that. And I'm going to tell you, let me qualify my statements. If you take that approach in terms of processing that thought, it puts the obligation on the oppressed to overcome, but never challenging the oppressor to change his course. So I think we need to be careful with that in terms of making a conclusion based on that. Why? I would say to my son, brother, exactly what you told him. But as a pastor and one who is obligated with trying to speak truth to power, I could not take that approach. The next one is, you know, the education piece, I agree with. But as Maria just alluded to, I think that's just one component of the overall problem. The problem in America isn't educated black people, it's black people finding opportunities equally as whites. It becomes a moving target sometimes. They're told that they don't have the qualifications, they go get qualifications, and they don't have opportunities. America is great because of opportunity. Matter of fact, some people said that we live in the land of opportunity. That's a profound statement for a number of reasons, but we have to remember the real issue in America isn't whether the manager can be CEO. Probably a percentage of the managers could be CEO. The question is, how many of them really going to get an opportunity to become CEO? And I think, you know, the last comment I had to make about your presentation was, you know, the real problem, brother, is money. And I don't mean to suggest that your presentation has been sanitized. I think it was a great, touchy-feely, don't hurt nobody presentation. But race, a word, by the way, which has no scientific definition, the word was created to formulate a basis by which one group of people can be treated differently than another. And the reason for that is money. Race is profitable in America. It is financially advantageous for race to become an integral part of the fabric of America. And what it comes down to is money. And I believe that is where the difficult task for us as Americans begins to pull us apart. And
Thank you.
thank you.
Thank you. I'll come back to some of your comments and ask you, and I'll give you an opportunity to respond to those as well. Judge Sullivan.
Yes, and thank you for having this really very important, very necessary, very difficult sometimes, but urgent kind of conversation. And because it's Martin Luther King week, I'm reminded, I read again when he talked about the fierce urgency of now. And I'm going to direct my comments to children because I was a juvenile judge for 9 years before I retired, and my territory was St. Petersburg. Some of the other judges had Oldsmar and East Lake Woodlands or Clearwater or the beaches, but I had St. Petersburg. And I was so naive when I went into the position that when I first saw a sea of black faces in my juvenile court, maybe 60, 70, 75% black faces, when I think the demographics are, what, 17% maybe African Americans in St. Pete, and I was just shocked. I just couldn't understand it. And so often those children who were charged, some of them very young, 8 years old, 9 years old, for very silly misdemeanor infractions, but were brought in, came with one parent or rode the bus sometimes, and they weren't as well dressed as the occasional white boy or girl who would come in with two parents in tow and a sport coat and a tie. It was just a big division in court, and I thought that we were not making a very good statement to the people in court. We were showing, you know, a huge and terrible kind of diversity. So the other judges and I kind of began to study this and to follow some of the children in that, and not follow them personally, but I mean to follow their records. And then I became even more discouraged because I learned that there were programs out there. For example, Academy Prep, which started in South St. Pete by the Fortune family that owns the Trade Winds, with scholarships for black boys from those very same neighborhoods, free reduced lunch neighborhoods, high crime rate neighborhoods, poverty neighborhoods. The same boys and girls that were in my court, those boys at Academy Prep never showed up in court. You know, they were busy all day. They had 3 meals. They had athletics. They had uniforms they wore. They had mentors. And 90% went on to college. 100% graduated from high school at that program, and 90% went on to college. So that made me feel even worse because I knew there were programs out there to keep these kids busy and off the street and not committing crimes. The Visible Man, it sounds like that's what you have, Mr. Phillips, and I really think that's just terrific. The Pointer Institute in St. Pete hooked up with John Hopkins Middle School when John Hopkins was having a lot of problems, and they had a lot of African American students there, and did a writing program. And so they become little newspaper reporters and editors. And we saw none of those children in our juvenile court. So there were, St. Pete College had a wonderful program in the summer where they brought in firemen and first responders and a helicopter, a medevac helicopter, and opened it up for a summer program for kids in that community, the South St. Pete, to come and learn that the police were their friends and could teach things. And after that program, none of those kids came into our court. So I guess what I'm trying to say today is what frustrates me even more is not the percentage that are there, not the segregated area that they live in and the poverty, but the fact that we know what works for kids, and we don't seem to be able to really fix it for all of them that deserve it, not just a few. And I hope I can keep working on that issue. Thank you.
Interesting for all of us. I'm going to make this very interesting for all of us. So I want to go back to some points that Reverend Williams made and ask you, Mr. Phillips, to respond to those. Unfortunately, there are people who believe and have theories developed to, in essence, blame the victim for their condition. And, you know, Reverend Williams, you ask about, you know, the blaming forces, the forces that we blame for the condition of black individuals as one of your truths that you mentioned. Could you respond to his question to you about that?
So thank you for giving me the opportunity to respond. I will say that I'm reluctant to respond for a couple of reasons. One, one of the things that makes this such a difficult issue is that there's so many factors, there's so many elements, there are so many things that seem contradictory that both can be true. I know the most basic way I can put this is that I'm tired of waiting on the oppressor. I'm not going to wait on the oppressor anymore. Been a couple centuries, seen enough. And to be very, very clear, the oppressor is not white people. The oppressor is some white people. The oppressor is some black people. The oppressor are these institutions, right? If you find yourself with some time, I urge you to read The New Jim Crow, Michelle Alexander's book around the criminal justice system. And to talk about how our institutions, right, what's embedded in how we do business as it relates to how we treat one group of people versus another. That's the oppressor. I know of no other way to empower the oppressed than to have them feel a sense of their worth, their power, their capability, their capacity for change, their ability to overcome. So I won't back off my truth. I can't. It's a truth. It's not me. It's the truth. I'm just. And I will say that what you have said is true also. That's the best response I have.
Okay. Now, would any of the panelists like to respond to any comments made by the other? I know you presented some very good solutions that you feel in holding people accountable to correct the problems that are experienced by blacks. Would anyone else like to respond and offer some solutions?
I don't want to dominate it. First of all, I would have that conversation with my son. We have to give them that urge, that unction, if you will, to overcome the obstacles. But I think as a nation, we have an obligation. If you talk about truth, it means the eradication of untruth. You can't have light unless you move darkness out of the way. So I think while we have the obligation to overcome it, I think somebody has to take a stand and say, we've got to change what's wrong. And you know, that's where I am with that. So.
And that is the position that I'm offering my comments. And as Mr. Phillips talked about how do we move past the conversation, the one thing that we have control over are the institutions that we pay for through our taxes. And if those of us who are frustrated about the continued and prolonged disparities that occur in the criminal justice system, I see it every day. I manage 2 different programs in the criminal justice system. I manage pretrial release supervision. Those are the defendants that are going to more than likely be adjudicated guilty and are going to possibly look at some resolution that may end them up in prison or with a conviction. I also manage pretrial diversion. Those are the individuals that are going to be diverted from the criminal justice system. Now, I want to ask somebody from the audience to please tell me, who do you think the largest percentage of my defendants are that are in the diversion program? Anybody want to take a guess? White folks, yes, sir. How many want to take a guess at the ones that will more than likely have some kind of conviction that will land them either in prison or probation, what the majority of those defendants look like in my programs? Black folks. It's a truth. And one of the challenges that we tend to have as those who are in leadership positions is acknowledging the truth. I admire Mr. Phillips for wanting to characterize these issues of truth because it's as Pastor Williams said, you can't have both. If we are going to move toward solutions, we have got to be bold and brazen about calling the truths. We've got to put names and faces. We cannot keep dealing with racism as this abstract, because what we then do is give people permission and not allow us to hold them accountable. And if, in fact, we're going to do that, we have to acknowledge, as Pastor Williams said, that we've got to bring the light to the situation to remove the darkness. And that's by beginning acknowledging some of your truths, and then talk about who do we hold accountable to help us get past the conversation, or get past the conversation of racism.
Thank you very much. Would you like to?
Yeah, I think another truth is that we have to admit that if we have a segregated community, a housing area that's segregated, and also has a lot of child abuse complaints and free and reduced lunch and poverty, we have to educate the police, and I have so much respect for the police all over Pinellas County, but we have to educate them that they can't keep finding kids doing silly little things that kids always do, stupid little things that kids always do, and getting arrested and brought into court because the heavy police presence in that community. It's kind of like the Tampa situation with bicycle riders, how the police stopped so many of them for not having a reflecting light, or 2 people on 1 bike, or not being licensed or something like that. But that's because the people, those were kids, a lot of them, or young adults who couldn't afford automobiles in that community. And I was on a little panel with Dr. Kamika Tomlin, our vice mayor of St. Petersburg. And actually, she came to my class. I teach juvenile law at Stetson Law School now. And she said, you know, if you fish in a trout pond, you'll catch trout. So if there's so many police in that area, and kids out doing, just hanging around doing things that they do, you know, they're going to get arrested more and more. So somehow we have to recognize that. And
I think they do. I think they do. Back to money. Public policy is driven by money. So you criminalize black behavior. Back when I was a boy, I didn't know what was going on. I saw Boss Hogg with the rebel flag, jumping bridges, running from the police. They were stars. They weren't criminals. What black group can go take a piece of public land? I'm just asking. So when you have public policy that guarantees a prison populace of 95%, ladies and gentlemen, penitentiaries in America are profit. They are money-making machines. So public policy then is formulated to keep the prisons full so that the contractors make money. Let's talk about race for real. I'm from Polk County, Florida. I know it. And I think one of the things that Mr. Phillips, being from the north, don't know about Juanita and Eagle Lake and the place here in Polk County. Listen, there were 11 identified hate groups. No, maybe 16, 14, something like that. 9 of them were in Pinellas County. And so what has happened is you criminalize that behavior so that the war on drugs become a war on black people. And you know, a lot of people don't want, you know, because, hey, drugs are bad, but it's the Lee Atwater perspective on steroids, that it hurts one group, but it hurts another group even more. So that's why I had that contingency judge about money, so they do realize it. And then you have, coupled with that, your requirements for minimum sentence requirements. So even though you see merit in a young man, a first-time offender, the law prohibits her from giving him an easy pass because you have minimum sentencing requirements. So the crack guy, for 1 ounce of crack, gets a much stiffer sentence than the executive with his gram of powder, same substance, different sentence.
A term, poverty pays. When you follow the trend of public policy, you look at the demographics that bring money into the communities, particularly in low-income urban communities, and you look at millions and millions of dollars And then you realize that if you've been in that community for some time, you hear those same demographics over and over and over again. We simply take the template out, we put a different name on it, we call it something else, we go through the same gyrations as if we're attempting to change something substantive, well, change some impact, some kind of socioeconomic status, and you ask yourself, how in the world, with all of these PhDs, all of these JDs, all of the MSs, MAs, and MBAs, how is it that in the 21st century, we cannot strategically assess a socioeconomic problem and bring about a solution? And the answer is just simple. There is no intent to change it, simply because poverty pays. And as the term goes, Mr. Phillips, just follow the money. And we can, and it speaks to the very issue that there is, we have a very interesting way of categorizing our socioeconomic status in the hood, where I live and raise my children, because I think it was just so important for me to say that it is not where a child is raised, it's not where a child goes to school, or who sits next to the child that goes to school, because the narrative that attempts to be made in Pinellas County is that the reason that our schools are failing is because black children are not sitting next to white children. And of course we know that that's lunacy, because the issue is not who the children are sitting next to, it's the person that you put in front of them to teach them and the resources that you give them to work with. That is the disparity. But it's amazing on how the narrative can be twisted, that somehow our media, some of our media sponsors, actually propel the notion that the reason that 5 elementary schools in my neighborhood within walking distance of my house, the majority of those children, where the percentage of those schools are populated by African American children, are failing, is simply because the Pinellas County school system moved to neighborhood schools. And you would be amazed at the number of educated folks that continue to propel and purport that narrative as if it is the truth. And it is not until we begin to have these public discussions, and I really want to thank St. Pete College, take the opportunity to thank you all for having this discussion, because I truly, 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 truly hope that it is the beginning of us to begin to tell the truth in Pinellas County, and only then will we begin to move some of these issues of racism out the way.
So speaking of telling the truth, let's go back to the poll and the response, and give you an opportunity to respond to their comment to the statement. What do you think about 88% agreed that racism has created separation between whites and blacks, and it's ingrained in the national character? What do you think about their responses, the audience's response to that?
So I participated, and in the interest of full disclosure, I'm the 4%. I'm undecided, and here's what I'm undecided about. I'm hung up on my deep belief in, experience of, faith in us as individuals. So I don't believe that statement is true if it applies to our individual character. I feel so much hope in who we are as individuals. I do believe that there is some truth in this statement as it is, so I put myself as undecided, but I just wanted to take this opportunity to reinforce and restate how much I believe in us as individuals to make these kinds of changes and live our lives in ways that support the kind of breakthrough that we all want. I see it every day.
Thank you. Ms. Scruggs?
I'm certainly a part of the 85% that believe that racism has created a separation between whites and blacks that is ingrained in the national character. And again, I believe that that has occurred simply because we are a capitalistic society that believes in the bottom line, the dollar. And as long as the dollar continues to drive the moral compass of this country, racism will continue to divide blacks and whites, because it will continue to polarize folks on the level, on just continuing to help people, or not, it will continue to perpetuate the notion that as individuals that we are different, and we will keep individuals separated. And one of the things that I do as the president of NAACP, I host a lot of the meetings that I have with individuals at my home, because I live right in the heart of Midtown on Melrose, in the house that I grew up in. And what I monitor when I have visitors, white visitors, is their reaction when they come into my house on Melrose. And the comment is always the same: oh my God, this is so homey. Oh, this is so, as if there was an expectation that it would be something different because I live on Melrose. And I believe that until you begin to peel away at people's, expose people to those that are different than them, but primarily very much the same, that we would continue to perpetuate a notion that we will remain divided among the issues of race if we give up our power. If we give up our power to the institutions that we support, I think we will continue to see that it is ingrained in our, that racism is ingrained in our national character only because the dollar rules in this country.
And I just want to draw your attention to, as we speak, more people have, I guess, commented. So the numbers have shifted, but the majority is still in the 85, now 85% in agreement. Reverend Williams, your response to that.
I would like to define national character. Are we saying who we are as a people? Because historically, the courts in St. Louis told Dred Scott that the Constitution didn't apply to you. Plessy versus Ferguson said that separate but equal. So if you look at the courts, the Civil Rights Act, not law, most of what has happened in America has been accomplished by executive order, not acts of Congress. When you begin to do an analysis of that, it's true. And we have much work to do. Ladies and gentlemen, even in Hollywood, where the lights are bright and the paychecks are big, there's a chasm. The actors don't believe that there's equality there. I'm talking about La La Land, ladies and gentlemen. The houses are big, but even then, there is this issue of identifying yourself as black or white. So if you look at the courts, if you look at what's happening in America, listen, I knew Clementa Pinckney. I've been in Emmanuel AME Church. Denmark Vesey, a slave revolt. The church was burned to the ground. Bethel in Washington, D.C., burned to the ground, 8 blocks from the Capitol. As a member of the African Methodist Episcopal Church, I know we battled for 200 years. In a few months, we'll be convening our 50th quadrennial session. 200 years of ministry in America. And I can tell you, there's a lot of work to be done. So sadly, I think the people in this room are right.
Judge Sullivan, your
Yes,
comments, please.
I voted A, but I kind of separated the sentence into two. If you could think about it, racism has created a separation between whites and blacks, period. That could be asked of a lot of people all over the world, and especially in European countries or something, countries who didn't have our history of slavery and our history of Dred Scott and Plessy versus Ferguson and labeling African American people property, not people. Right. That is ingrained in the national character. So with that going together, linking those two, which could be separate sentences, together, I had no problem at all quickly voting A, because it is ingrained in our national character and we're still paying for it. But I have one kind of positive thing to say. I'd be remiss if I didn't. The last 7 years, a couple years before I left the court and up till now, we did start a diversion program for youth that has really benefited African American youth in St. Petersburg and Clearwater and all over, where they now get civil citations or a warning from police, up to three of those before they're ever charged with a crime, as long as it's a misdemeanor like a petty theft first time, or caught with marijuana first time. We have drug courts. And if you look at the statistics, it's African American children are really benefiting from that. Now, the downside of that is they're getting more citations because there's still more police activity in the neighborhoods where they live and go to school. But they are benefiting from that. So fewer and fewer are being charged and will have criminal records. So in a way, that's good news.
Thank you very much. Now, I know that there were some student facilitators at different tables. Would any of you like to give a quick emphasis on a quick comment on what the consensus was at your table? Could you wait for the mic, please? And then we open up to you, so you too can participate in the conversation.
Good evening. I sympathize and empathize with all the pain and the problems that we are discussing tonight. And this has been an ongoing thing since I came to the United States, being a recruit in the 1960s for the medical profession, because the big need of physicians and nurses in this country. And it's only now that we have retired, or what I call myself as jobless, do I have the opportunity to listen and understand this main problem of why we are talking like we are Crayolas. Black and white are colors. Those are Crayola. We're not a box of Crayolas. We are human beings, okay? So why can't we take each other as human beings, as always? Why do we have to, since we have learned, I have lived here for 50 years. This year, everything is 50 years for me and my husband. As a couple, as a citizen of the United States, 50 years, and I never understood why do we have to call ourselves African American, Asian American? Why? Why is that? Why can't we just be Americans, period? And the problem really is not on the institution. I was blessed enough that when I felt discriminated or put down by anybody, it's not the hospital or the institution. No, it's that person in front of me. And we deal with it right then and there. Okay? So you don't get miserable all year or all your life. That's your decision. That would be my decision, and that would be my fault, nobody else. If I cannot break it right then and there, then it's my fault, because I'm stupid enough not to say anything. Okay? So I think the solution for this ongoing problem, I have attended a lot of seminars like this, and the solution is really not there discussed, because we forget we are the problem. We are the solution. Nobody else can change us.
Thank you very much.
The only one who can change is ourselves. So when somebody discriminates me, I don't accept it. Like I was told, we don't call doctors as doctors in this department. And I said, why is that? Because we want them to be comfortable and not have a title before them. I said, do you know how many years and how many thousands of dollars I spent to be called a doctor? I did not go to school so they can be comfortable. I went to school so that I can get them out of their disease. Okay?
Thank you very much. And I'm going to ask anyone else to...
Solve the problem in yourself. Check yourselves. That's it.
Thank you. Thank you. There are several people who have had their hand raised. I know there's a hand here and there. Please wait for the person with the mic. Does anyone want to comment to the statement made just now?
I would merely say that she needs to be up here, but and I can understand her. But the fact of the matter is, institutional racism becomes a lot more difficult to recognize and to address. For example, it could be a question on an application. It could be whether you have an insurance or not. And a person like you that is providing service would be totally benign to the institution and the unjustness that is alive and well because you're just doing your job. There are a lot of wonderful people that try their best to do their best, and they do, but the system itself prevents equality.
Thank you. The next question, please. We want to get as many questions in a short period of time. Go ahead, please.
I hear you say that
Much better, thank you.
education is a solution to the problem. I hear we talk about politics is adding to the problem. And all of this, but you kept religion out of the process. But if you just took the R, the P, and the E, religion, politics, and education, these are the biggest hustles on the block. Churches across America collect billions in a year in tithes and offerings. Why go to someone else and say, oh, we need money here, we need money there? Who you paying at the church that much? I grew up around here, from Tarpon to St. Pete. These churches still look the same. I'm 45 years old. They still look the same. There's nothing going on. So look to that. When you say politics, you got the parties. If you don't like them, start your own. Why not go vote for somebody in another party? That'll get the other parties to change their mind. When it comes to education, when I came up, people said, oh, I got mine, you get yours. Now you push them, oh, you need it, you need it, you need it. See, the thing is, we can go to the institution and everything else, but when it comes to the individual, that's what you got to go to. If you racist, if you got a problem with it, that's on you. I'm a free man. My granddaddy told me ain't nobody can put you nowhere, can't nobody do nothing to you unless you let them. You stand up. I agree with the lady. Wherever it happened at, that's where it go down at. I don't need to go to the church. I don't need the NAACP. We can handle that right here. And y'all disrespect, you keep saying Dr. King, you disrespecting Dr. King's legacy. Dr. King didn't keep debating the issue. They went out and did something about the issue. It wasn't just black folks doing something about the issue. Everyone did something about the issue. So if you want to race to the truth, we need everybody to get together. It's no who's the leader. It's no I think this. It's not my opinion. Put your opinion. Louis Farrakhan said this. And I was at the State of the Black Union, held by Tavis Smiley some years ago at Eddie Long's church in Georgia. And Louis Farrakhan said, man, if you could check your ego at the door, and you really want to find a viable solution, we can all sit down at the table of brotherhood without an ego, without your agenda before my agenda, without we need another nonprofit in our neighborhoods, without it's the system, it's that, and come up with a viable solution. And that solution is, like John Lennon said, just imagine what we could be if we weren't sitting around having these debates all the time. Imagine what we could be. And I just wonder, I'm just going to ask y'all on the panel, you know, you talk about the racism and everything else. Do you ever talk about how it feels to be free? Not to have to worry about that? My uncle was my daddy. My uncle had a 7th grade education. My uncle was a contractor, not no sub, nothing this. He was the man. He didn't say he pulled himself up by his bootstraps. He just said, you always be a man. Teach our kids that. It's not about the teacher. It's about sitting down, shutting up, and learning something. If you're hungry, somebody need to feed you. But we need to stop all of this. It's the truth. You got a truth. I got a truth. They got truth. That's too many truths in one place. And for all y'all who go to church, it ain't but one truth. So my question to you is, what is the solution? Not 5 solutions, 6 solutions. Give us one viable solution. Education is not working. Politics isn't working. Religion isn't working. All of our opinions isn't working. So give us a solution to the problem.
Okay,
Well,
thank you very much. And I'm going to ask
You
anyone
hurry
else,
up because I got
anyone
something for
else-
him.
Okay, anyone else to please keep your comments short or question, get
Don't
to your
put me
question.
on no clock on
Because
this
we
one.
want to be able to give more and more people an opportunity to participate. Go ahead.
Without religion, there will be no Princeton. There will be no Harvard. There will be no institutions of higher learning in this country. Without religion, there will be no hospitals. There will be no institutions of health. The African Methodist Episcopal Church has 13 undergraduate institutions, one here in Florida, 1,360,000 per month to run. You want to know where the money goes? We've been educating people in America for 200 years. We have done our work. Let me say this to you. You spoke like somebody that speaks about religion but doesn't have any. What we really have to do, and let me, no, you had your turn. Sit down, bro. It's my turn now. You challenge my institution, and I'm going to challenge yours. We're here because dialogue is good. We don't have to agree, but you have to hear me, just like I heard you. And I can appreciate you and your passion. But at the end of the day, they're nothing more than feel-good statements. I run 2 nonprofits. I serve 460 kids. After-school tutoring, lunches, reading programs. I'm out here, boots on the ground, every day, touching those people that are hurting. So to suggest that this is a get-over or a con insults me. Well, bruh, hold on. I think you need to let me have my 2 minutes.
One person
because you
speak at
have
a time.
yours, and
Thank
I
you
don't
very
want to
much.
become antagonistic. I'm just showing you that institutions like Harvard, like Princeton, would not be in existence without the people of faith. To suggest that the people of faith are some non sequitur in this country that we don't matter and we have not given into what is great in this country is just wrong.
Next question, please.
How you doing? My name is Kevin James. I'm a student at St. Pete College. I don't need it. I'm a student at St. Pete. My name is Kevin James. I'm a student at St. Pete College.
Kevin, I've got a microphone that works.
My name's Kevin.
Here you go. Yeah, give him one more.
Can you hear me? 1, 2.
This one works, Kevin.
My name's Kevin James. I'm a student at St. Pete College, and I'm in the baccalaureate program for public policy and administration. And at my table right there, they suggested that I answer the question. They use my answer to the question. We asked if racism is a problem in this country. As a veteran who served 8 years in the military, as a father, as a husband who's been married for 18 years, it does not make me feel good to answer in the affirmative. I look at incidents from all the way back in history. I look at the Rodney King, Miami, the Overtown riots. Look at what's going on in New York prior to Eric Gardner. Faces, names, incidents, places, it all blurs together to the point where it hurts. And I'm reminiscent of what Andre Bauer said in the HBO special Tuskegee Airmen when he went before the panel, who wanted to kill the airmen. And he asked them this question right here, and I'm pose this question to you. After we look at each and every incident from Ferguson, New York, Sanford, Trayvon Martin, Michael Brown, Sandra Bland, names and places on and on. Am I merely to be an American? As a person who served this nation with honor, dignity, and courage? Am I merely to be an American when the mood suits you? As a father who has to have this conversation with his sons and daughters about how you're not supposed to be perceived, am I merely to be an American when the mood suits you? And to the lady back there in the back who was talking about why can't we just be an American? Ma'am, I can answer this right here. You have a beautiful culture. You can trace your history as far back. Your culture makes you who you are. It's a fabric to this nation. It's what's diversity. It's what brings out diversity, our nation's superpower. To ask me to put aside what little of my African roots I have, to say you're not an African American, you're not a Latino American, an Asian American, you are an American. It's a death to you. It's a death to me. It kills.
Not at this time. Not at this time.
To dismiss that one part of you. I understand that, man, but in order for you,
And
I'm
Mr.
united because of what I am. Okay, but to say that I have to dismiss that, that's what, okay, but that's how it was perceived to me.
And we are going to have to move on. I appreciate your comments. That's very powerful. It's given us a lot to think about. And clearly, as you're hearing from the passion and the desire to talk about this issue, how important this is, and that it's not something that you could just have a short conversation about. Everyone has something very important they want to say. I apologize to you that you're not getting a chance to express all of it, but the goal is to also ensure that more and more people have an opportunity to speak. So please keep your comments as brief as possible. Thank you.
My name is Jack Levine. I'm a family policy advocate in Tallahassee. I drove down for this conversation, which has been rich and inspiring. Kevin, thank you for your service. Thank you for being there when we need you. And thank you for your expressed fatherhood. My question is about gender. There are differentiations around race, and those are acknowledged and real. We also have a differentiation around gender. And my concern is we've got a guy problem. As part of a commission on responsible fatherhood, we met a lot of men around the state, interviewing men, talking about their core values in family and community. I met men who could name 100 football players and didn't know the name of their single children's teacher. I met men who filled their heads with all kinds of spectatorism but couldn't name their state legislator. Now, I know I'm indicting my gender here, but we've got ourselves a guy problem. I've met men who had 7 different children with 7 different women. The question we have to ask ourselves is, what are we doing to separate men from responsibility? 1 of 1,000 preschool teachers in Florida is a male. Now, I give you that as not just numbers. It's about a differentiation of how men identify themselves in a community, in a family, and in politics, and we've got to work on this. In addition, Neil, as an admirer of yours, this is my 3rd time hearing you do a presentation which always inspires me, is we've got to address the issue of gender as well as race if we're going to move forward and make progress for all of our children and all of our futures.
Thank you for your comments on the question. Does anyone want to respond to that question? Anyone want to respond? Okay. Thank you. Next question, please. We have some hands over here. Let's try to get some questions from this side of the room.
You know, maybe to say that, one of the things that I would remind you about is one of the great benefactors of the civil rights movement was women. And I think as a result of that effort, women have made great strides in America, rightfully so. They're some of the most talented, hardworking people in America. And I think those of us that are men have a difficult time with tall women and smart women. But I would just say to that, you know, whether we admit it or not, that's a good problem to have. And I think they're some of the greatest Americans and do some of the greatest work here in our country.
Thank you. Any question from this side of the room? Right there. And then over there.
Not so much a question, but wanted to offer a brief perspective. I'm a student as well, and I'm not a public policy student, but I am a secondary math major, and I plan to teach math. We don't have a lot of arguments in math classes like this, and we can usually come to agreement on what the answer to a problem is. And so maybe we could look at this in a mathematical sense, and in a sense of a broader space of time. When we talk about truth and institutions, they can be ambiguous terms and requires perspective, each of us having an individual perspective. And as I look across the room, I see a spectrum of skin tones, and I'm somewhere in the middle, maybe. And I'm sure there's a broad political range of opinion, and I'm probably somewhere in the middle as well. And that said, looking at today's problems through a narrow focus of a small parameter of time, a boundary, of American history only being 240 years old, racism has been an institution probably since the dawn of civilization. Truth is an ambiguous term that many different cultures and civilizations can't agree upon. But as to the question, I think that I was the only dissenter at my table because I disagreed, and maybe for a different reason than Mr. Phillips did, but my reason for disagreeing is I think that our national character, when you look at a broad spectrum of time, was that our country was founded on ideals that at that point in time may not have been embraced by the whole world, but for the first time in history, it was an effort to recognize that all men were created equal and to try to give those rights, you know, and we cannot debate where they're given, but to ensure that those rights would be upheld under law. So I don't see racism in any way tarnishing our national character, because I see the national character as something that in the long stream of the history of humanity, for the first time in America, there was an effort to reverse much of the crimes that included racism that were institutions of past cultures. And I think that over the course of the 240 plus years the country's existed, that we've made large strides and improvements, and we're forming a better union. So in a positive way, I think that should be a foundation from which to approach solutions to the problem, because this room is a great mix. And I'm proud to be in a room like this where you see so many different faces and so many different people with different opinions to be able to have a conversation like this.
Okay,
and
thank
so
you.
maybe bearing that in mind, we can really make progress.
Thank you. There was a gentleman there. Yes, please. Please.
Good evening. Doug Walker is my name. And I want to frame this question. You mentioned, Neil, the new Jim Crow. And one of the things Michelle Alexander says in the book, she defines mass incarceration as a collection of laws, policies, traditions, and institutions that work collectively to keep a group of people in a permanent underclass status defined largely by race. Mm-hmm. Right? So And I like that definition because it deals with not just incarceration, not just the number of people who are in prison, but it talks about economics, it deals with education, it deals with the whole thing, right? All of that stuff, right? But she also offered a solution that I kind of agree with, and I want to get some feedback on that. At a conference in Chicago a couple of years ago, Michelle said, the core challenge to ending mass incarceration is dispelling the myth that some of us are not worthy of genuine care, concern, and compassion. Howard Thurman, 50 years ago, in The Luminous Darkness, he talked about racism and segregation, and he identified it as a problem of the mind and spirit, right? He said it is a mood of the mind and spirit. And he said something interesting. He said that if you don't get to that, something more insidious will take its place and be harder to deal with. So bearing in mind what Michelle says about this core challenge, right, that all of us are worthy of genuine care, concern, and compassion, what I'd like to hear is how we might imagine our country, our communities would look if we had that attitude, and then if we were able to dispel that myth, how would it look, and how might we get there?
Very good question. Thank you. Our panelists, who would like to go first?
I'll offer, I hope I'm on. Yes, I feel like I'm. Thank you. And really heartening reminders. So I run a school, and I'm often asked either by someone in our school community or a visitor, sort of what's the fundamental building block here, right? And they expect a response that has something to do with the curriculum, resources we use, the professional development we use for our teachers, something about our facilities. When I treat this, right, we all know the 3-year-old whose question to every response you give is why, until you keep getting down to the actual core, I always respond, this is an issue of worth, period. We have to get our boys to feel their worth, their value, because unless and until we're able to help them recognize their immense worth and immense value, then all of those other things won't matter. They won't come into play. So one of the ways that we get them to recognize their worth is we tell them they're going to be successful because of who they are, not in spite of who they are. And when you start talking to them in those terms, they start learning how to advocate for themselves. They start learning how to demand a higher level. They start ensuring that us, right, as the grown-ups in the building, hold them to a higher level. That is what worth, that's the ripple effect of worth. And I just believe so much in this idea of worth as the start, as the beginning, as the core. I really appreciate your comments.
Thank you. Anyone else?
I certainly want to echo Mr. Phillips's comments, and that is the core of beginning to change the mind about our value of how others perceive us, beginning to change how we feel about ourselves. Right. One of the reasons I intentionally stay on Melrose Avenue, because unlike many of us who have been successful and have received educations, we've moved out of the neighborhood, and then we want to come back into the neighborhood to fix us. And I truly believe that until the children in our neighborhood see those that look like them, they can touch them, they can sit on their porch, they can converse with them, it is only through that one-on-one interaction that our children begin to see the value within themselves. And again, I can't overemphasize, it's us beginning to see the value in us before we can expect anybody else to see the value in us.
Thank you.
And the only thing I would add to that is, in addition to that, that sense of self-value becomes a sense of responsibility. You know, one of the things that I think we fall short is claiming the world's problems and being obligated to find solutions. So men, you know, the one or two people that break these glass ceilings, you know, you can't just sit on your yacht. You got to be willing to do what Neil Phillips does, roll up your sleeves and say, hey, yeah, I may have pierced it, but I also have an obligation to help Shaniqua and the rest of the people who, you know, I read this book every day that says, speak for those who cannot speak for themselves. And we have an obligation to solve the world's problems, to claim, you know, we just can't be benign of service. And I think one of the great tragedies in America is that the people who have an opportunity to speak are not speaking.
Okay. And would you like to respond? Okay. We have time for one more question. This will be the final question. Two short questions. And
We need to have it on the mic, please.
so while we get a mic to you, could we'll take, yes. Yeah, we could come and take this back.
I'm a dissenting voice. The worst situation for anybody is to be in a set of institutions which are unjust and repressive and filled with people who are racist. The worst situation for a person to be is to be a black woman in a jail with mental illness. Natasha McKenna was in such a jail in Northern Virginia. She was being transferred to another jail on the grounds that with mental illness, she resisted being apprehended by a policeman, so he charged her with assault. So as in the process of transferring her, they pulled her out of the cell naked. And with 5 men, all equipped with masks and suits and so forth, they tased her not once, twice, 3 times, 4 times, 5 times! And then they jumped on her. And soon she was dead. Has that tale been told? No. This is because those institutions don't have reporters. There's nobody inside to say what happened. Nobody to make the claims against those who did it. And those who did it are going to go home free. They also had a set of people who were supposed to be doing mental health stuff in that hospital. They didn't come to our rescue because they go home on weekends. So the problem is much more than just our individual responsibility. But it's full of institutions which are racist.
Thank you very much.
My name is Margaret. It works. And I am a member of the SGA here on campus, and I'm a public policy and administration student. And I do have 2 really quick questions. And Adrian had asked, can you give us one solution? And if we could start with one solution, couldn't we start at the ground? Like in the Constitution, it says all men are created equal. Well, our Congress redefines words all the time. Can't we simply redefine all men to be humankind? Because that would cover everybody, including women. I mean, it would be very simple. They want to redefine rape. If you want to be scared, get a Black's Law Dictionary. Look up person, human, and monster. You will be scared out of your mind, those 3 words. Why can't we redefine all men to be humankind and just start there? Why do we have to have all these amendments? All we really probably had to do was just that. That's it. And my next one, really quick. Before Obama came into office, they put in place these changes within the police force. They started bringing over special forces troops, Homeland Security started bringing them over and putting them into training sessions, like little cell training sessions. And they would train a few officers, and they would go off and they would train a few other officers. And then those officers would train a few of their officers, and it would just kind of go on like an Amway board or a cell infestation. So we brought these insurgent guerrilla warfare street tactics over here in 2008 and started implementing them into our police force. What repercussions, does anybody in here done any research on the repercussions this has had in our communities? Is the instant reactions we're seeing, bam, 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 bam. The little boy in Ohio, I mean, he was gunned down in a park, like bam, that. Ohio is a right to carry state. If they thought he was an adult, what was he doing wrong? He wasn't even doing any, even if he was an adult with a gun, he wasn't doing anything wrong. They opened their car door, and in 3 or 4 seconds, he was dead. You know, I've watched the video over and over. What did they see? I mean, he moved, he twitched, and he was dead. So it's any of these tactics that they've brought over and they've infiltrated into our police forces, what repercussions have come from that?
Would any of our panelists like to respond to her question?
Well, the first statement you made about the Constitution, you know, first of all, good luck, but I think we might be wise to make a distinction between words on a document and men's hearts. Because to have something on paper is good, to have it in your heart puts it in practice. Second point, I don't believe that 100%, I don't believe, let me say this another way. I think that the vast majority of law enforcement do a magnificent job. I think that they're out there putting their tails on the line, trying to keep us safe. I think the poor public policy, the gun lobby, the most powerful lobby in America, their agenda is moving forward. These police officers show up, it's so many guns, they don't know who the bad guy is. I think we're putting law enforcement in a dangerously precarious position. They're outgunned, and the laws are not on their side, and they have to make a decision in a split second. Now, that being said, I think we need to root out the 1% rogue cops out there that are criminals with badges. And I believe that we need law enforcement, we need to make public policy work on their behalf, and we need to root out the bad in every institution. I believe every institution has it.
Ms. Scruggs, would you like to respond to that?
Just briefly, and yes, there are, having been previously certified in 3 law enforcement academies, one of the things that I've been very vocal on is some of the military tactics that are being deployed in the African American community. To come out of my house and see a Humvee park down the street, I about lost it with the chief and thought, have we just absolutely lost our minds? And one of the things and one of the discussions that we have to have in the family of law enforcement is the fact that we've got to police ourselves, because that 1% that Pastor Williams talked about is making it bad for the many great officers that have continued to sacrifice to protect and serve. And unfortunately, it's some of the guerrilla tactics that have somewhat helped, I think, help some of our officers lose their way because of the mindset when you're in a tactical stance and you begin to take on the public, the average Joe Blow, as if they're ISIS, you begin to develop the kind of law enforcement tactics that I don't think any of us want to see in neighborhoods.
Thank you very much. So you've heard from Mr. Phillips. It's 10 truths. You've heard a response for panelists. You have had an opportunity to weigh in. And clearly, you can see that given more time, we could continue to talk about this issue. And oftentimes it's when we're coming near to the end that people get warmed up to the point where they really want to say something. But unfortunately, we don't have enough time tonight. However, you have all the time you need to continue this conversation, this dialogue with your family, friends, colleagues, in your institutions, and also, as you're hearing, have heard from some of our panelists, with your policymakers. Because the solution lies not only with individuals, but it lies with the institutions as well as within certain systems. Racism, by your consensus, exists. We do live in a racist society. We are not yet in a post-racial society, despite the fact that we have, many people think that we have a black president, therefore we have evolved so much that racism doesn't exist. We all have a part to play in the solution, and we must first acknowledge that the problem exists, and we must examine what our role is in perpetuating racism, but we must also look at what are the benefits that we gain from the status quo, i.e. white privilege, and what are the costs to racism in terms of the violence that we see in our streets, the deaths of young boys, the mass incarceration that people have spoken to, and further illuminated by the story that Mr. Phillips shared with us about just jogging in his neighborhood. And I must say that what he described, and when he was sharing his story, my immediate reaction was fear, because I knew what the outcome could be. And fear because as a black parent with a black son, that's a reality that I live with every day, regardless of where he lives, and especially because he lives in another state, far away from me, where I still can't reach out and protect him. So we must continue this conversation. Thank you for being here. I would like to have you come up, and David, and close out the program for us. But once again, to thank all of our panelists tonight. First, our keynote speaker, Mr. Phillips. Thank you. Mrs. Scruggs, thank you so much for your comments. Reverend Williams, so passionate, so vocal, so right on. Judge Sullivan, we thank you for what you have done, for your consciousness while in the courts, and your education of future lawyers and judges so that they will do the right thing by all of our children. Thank you all for being with us tonight.
And may we also thank our moderator, Dr. Henry. Well, I'm sorry we didn't get to all the questions, but we do try to honor our time commitments. But I will accept the challenge that you threw out to continue the conversation. While we did get into many top areas in this topic, we didn't get into a lot of others. Just maybe the next time we can take a single aspect of it, like structural racism or a voter suppression, which is a huge problem nationwide and is growing. We will be talking about those things in the future this year. I hope you'll give me an opportunity to thank and recognize the work of our staff who made this evening possible. I'd like to name them: Jacqueline Schuett, Shantae Williams, Patricia Winden, Adrian West, Stephen Hayes, Pamela Fonte, Raphael Witten on the audio-visual, and from the Pinellas Web Solutions on the video cameras, our facilities staff, and the provost staff. All of those help make this possible. And one more thing before you leave, please note our next two programs coming up. One is just a week from tonight, but it's not here. It's down at the Palladium in downtown. 4 days before the first voting, we're going to talk about the primaries, and we have a very well-known and respected national speaker, Michael Steele, coming to talk with a Democratic representative bipartisanly about the primaries, who's going to win or who they think or who might win or who's out, but also what do the primaries mean, and is this the best we can do? And then on February 23rd, we have a name that people of my generation might recognize, but younger ones won't. Marvin Cobb. He is a former CBS newsman, very well known in the 50s and 60s. He's written a book about Putin and Russia, and we worry about terrorism, but we perhaps should be worrying about the new Cold War. That will be a free event on, it will be a dinner event here, same as this, on the 23rd. That's all for tonight. Thank you very much, and safe journey home.